Well, here we are, you guys. I have a wonderful guest on the show today who's going to encourage the socks right off of you and give you 4 ways to really start your homeschool out strong. This is going to be a fantastic conversation with my friend, Steve Lambert. This is the Heidi St. John podcast. Stick around. I think you're going to be encouraged. So my friend, Steve, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Heidi. It's always good to be with you.
It's fun to see you. And you and I talking on the phone the other day a little bit about back to homeschool. And I mentioned to you, I have 1 child left now who is in, wait for it, high school.
That's crazy. When you and I met, you had 6 in school, and now you only had 6. Now you have 7, and it's only 1 left.
I know. Well, it kind of goes to how quickly the years go by. I mean, as it turns out, everything that all those older moms said to me when my kids were little was true. I just didn't want to hear it. They're like, oh, enjoy it, honey. And I'm like, you enjoy it. I stuck in this for the rest of my life. Turns out I wasn't.
No, turns out it goes by very quickly, shockingly quickly.
Yeah, it really does. You guys were homeschooling your kids back in the 80s when dinosaurs roamed the earth.
1981 we started. Yeah, dinosaurs for sure.
Dinosaurs for sure. And you have seen, like I have, a lot of changes in the homeschool movement in the last 35, 40 years.
Yep.
And I think one of the things that I have noticed in particular is that there are so many choices now for homeschoolers that you can almost get run over by the sheer number of things that are available for you to do and never be home. And a lot of these homeschool moms start out with the bar way up here. And then, 1 month into it, they're a sobbing mess on the kitchen floor and they feel discouraged. And so I asked you to come on today to really just help a lot of us get off on the right foot so that we can finish strong, right? Because anyone can start strong. It's hard to finish strong.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, you're right. I mean, it's a whole different world than it was 43 years ago when we started. We didn't really know anybody that was homeschooling. We just kind of made it up as we went, and it was a little frightening and intimidating, but frankly, it was rather freeing. And today, every eye is on you, and there are so many metrics to measure all these crazy statistics and outcomes that people try to measure to, and everybody in your extended family is looking over your shoulder and watching and trying to coach you on, how you're doing this, or maybe how you shouldn't be doing this. And there's 10,000 curriculum choices out there, and it's just kind of overwhelming for somebody just starting out, I think.
Yeah, it really is. And I know, there are a lot of things that I was just talking to Savannah about this the other day, because, she's homeschooling, 3 of her kids this fall. And
soon to be 5.
Soon to be 5. We were talking about how interesting her perspective is as opposed to mine, because when I started, I really didn't know anybody that was homeschooling. She has a lifetime of memories of being homeschooled. And so she has I think, just a good perspective on what's important to do and sort of what isn't. And so she's able to let things go that I wasn't able to let things go. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, because I think there's so many things that I so love and admire about you and Jane and the way that you have ministered to and helped homeschool parents over the year. But I have watched you, Steve, talk many a crying homeschool mom down out of a tree. And I'm hoping today that you can give some homeschoolers at the start of their new year just a little bit of direction, things that will be life-giving for them to help them get off on the right foot at the beginning of this school year.
Well, I'd love to do that, and I hope I can. I appreciate the opportunity. Let me start off by saying that even if you're not very good at this, that your kids are probably going to do fine. I read a survey some years ago now, and they asked both public and private school teachers, on average, how much time do you spend each day with each of your students, answering any questions they might have, and talking to them one-on-one. And the national average for K through 12 was less than 20 seconds per day.
Wow.
So that means if you give it your best shot for 2 or 3 hours in the morning for a couple of weeks, your kids have already gotten more one-on-one instruction and more questions answered than they would have gotten in an entire school year. in a public classroom or a private classroom. And so that ought to be a starting point to at least give you some reassurance that even if you're not very good at it, your kids are going to do fine. The deck is stacked in your favor because tutorial education, having one dedicated teacher to a handful of students, is so much more inherently effective and efficient than a classroom. That it allows you to personalize instructions and your kids zoom academically, and that's shown on virtually every test, both private and government, that homeschool kids typically do 20 to 25% better across the board on standardized testing than their public school peers. So there's a fact to kind of chew on as you begin the new year. But I'd also say, I'd encourage parents to focus on learning and not education. Let me unpack that because I realize that sounds a little confusing. If you're thinking about, I'm responsible for their education, that they have to know everything there is to know about life, all the state capitals, all the, everything, that's pretty overwhelming. But the reality is you're not accountable for that and you're not responsible for that, and you'll never be successful at that because there's so much out there to cover and the world is changing. I mean, when I was a kid, Pluto was a planet, and then it wasn't, and then it was, and then it wasn't, and I'm not sure if it is or isn't today, So, if you spent a lot of energy memorizing the 9 planets, you wasted some time because, it turns out there were only 8 or 8.5 or something. But if you teach a child to learn, then they go on a lifetime quest that they'll still be learning, 80 years in the future, long after you and I are gone. And so focusing on teaching them to learn and to love learning is probably a healthier goal than to say I'm responsible for the sum total of all education up to college, because that's a little overwhelming.
So I have asked you to come up with, in all of your spare time, in your genius mode over there, because there's nobody that can come up with talking points faster and better than you, coming up with 3 points to help us get off on a successful homeschool year. You actually outdid what I asked you to and came up with 4. 4 points for homeschool families to get off at a great start. And the first one you said was modeling for your kids, modeling that strong foundation. What do you mean by that?
Well, someone once said that your kids don't listen to anything you say, but they watch everything that you do. And sometimes that's a little daunting and intimidating because they see us at our worst sometimes. But use it to your advantage. Let them see you praying in the morning before class. Let them see you reading the Word of God. Let them see you saying, I'm sorry, I was wrong, and would you forgive me? Let them see you working through relationship issues with your husband. Let them see you and watch you in the practice. So rather than telling them that they have to do all these things, model that for them in such a way that they're watching without saying a word, just quietly observing. And my experience over the years has been that those kids in the future someday will say, boy, I never remember an evening going to bed that I didn't see my dad reading his Bible before he went to sleep at night, or I never remember us starting school that Mom didn't pray and ask the Lord to help us today.
Mm-hmm. It's really true. I know that one of Jay's core memories of growing up is seeing his mom every morning in a chair in front of the big picture windows at their house on Big Lake, reading her Bible. And it really imprinted him. I mean, she didn't need to say, I'm going to read my Bible today. She just did it. And really, that's what you're saying. You're saying, be the person that you want your kids to become. Exactly.
Somebody said once, if you want your child to be a reader, let him catch you reading. And so if that's something that was foreign to you, if you never grew up reading, now's the time to correct that, because telling your children to read is not nearly as effective as letting them see you reading in your spare time, both nonfiction and fiction, as well as the Word of God.
Yeah, so good. It's so good. And the next point, when I love this one because I actually wrote about this in the Busy Homeschool Mom's Guide to Daylight, when I said that successful homeschoolers are flexible. We've got to be flexible because you just don't know what's going to come at you from minute to minute.
Flexibility is key. Homeschooling will break you if you're stiff and rigid, sooner rather than later in most cases. So flexibility is key. And, at the risk of sounding sexist, I'm going to throw this out there for you, Heidi. I don't think you and I have ever talked about this, but
I read... The risk of sounding sexist. Oh, this will be interesting.
I know, right? So I read one time that most, not all, but most women navigate by landmark. You go till you get to the Dairy Queen, and then you turn right till you get to the water tower, and then you turn left until you get to the shopping center, and then it's across the street.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably true.
Most men, not all, but most, navigate by dead reckoning. So if I were leaving your house and trying to go to the Pacific Coast, I can go west for a while and then kind of north and then west some more. I can go south for a while, then west. Sooner or later, I'm going to get wet if I keep driving. And so guys just kind of, they don't think about landmarks. They just think, well, my end goal is to end up over there. So there's 100 different route combinations. And so if I got a green light here, I'll go straight. If I got a red light, I'll turn right on red and save some time. So I say that by way of saying, if you have certain learning objectives in mind, you can bowl your way forward right through traffic and hit every red light along the way to follow the landmarks, or you can be flexible. And if an opportunity presents itself and you are planning on talking about astronomy this week, but an opportunity comes up to talk about weather or insects, be flexible. Sooner or later, you'll get to where you're going. You got to do it all anyway, so why not do it the easy way? Take the green light while you can, turn right on red if you can avoid the conflict with your child. So if the goal is to help them enjoy the journey, to discover that learning is fun, that learning is awesome, that research is cool, that books are amazing, and pounding your way through a box curriculum that dictates every day's lesson plan for you may feel comforting, but in the end, you're dragging a whole lot of weight every day that you don't need to drag if you could just be flexible.
That's really important. And I think I remember talking to you guys about this a long time ago, but I'm homeschooling the kids. And I was reading, I love to read biographies to the kids. And so we would read, all the time, every day. We were always reading something. And at one point we were reading The Hiding Place. Well, The Hiding Place is all about, the takeover of the Nazis into Germany and into Poland. And we started reading about Corrie ten Boom's family, and then we started reading about Ravensbrück, and then we started reading about Auschwitz. And before you knew it, instead of doing science that day, we were going to the library and we were getting books on World War II because the kids were really interested at this point in everything that was happening around the story of Corrie ten Boom. And I think that we took almost the entire fall, and instead of doing what I had planned, I think we got more done. The kids still talk about it because we kind of got to strike while the iron was hot. And had I been rigid and been like, nope, this is what the curriculum says. We read this book, then we go to this book. Had I been rigid, I think we would have missed that opportunity.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I always tell moms, if you doubt that principle, hold a mirror up to your own face and look back on your 5th grade, social studies test. What do you remember from the textbook? Do you remember who signed the Magna Carta? Do you remember who was the Norman conqueror or when the Norman conquest took place? No, because it just was this week's assignment. You're at the tyranny of the next. Mama, why do we have to study this? This is not interesting to me. Well, I don't know, honey. It's next, so we have to do it next. And so flexibility on the broader kind of the macro plane also, because if you're pregnant and you're on bed rest for the last 3 months and whatever, you're not going to do exactly what you planned to do. But you know what? It's all right. The Lord knew that this was going to be happening at this season of your life, and he still thought you'd be the best teacher for your kids. And so you change it up, and the kids crawl in bed around you, and you read aloud for much of that last 2 months in bed and make up for some of the field trips and other projects that you were hoping to do afterwards. Because we're aiming, somebody said I could care less whether your child can read by the time they're 5. But we'll know how you did as a homeschooler if your kids are reading at 35. If you've created someone who loves learning and who spends a lifetime learning information, then you've been a successful homeschooler. If your kid's the first one out of the starting blocks to learn all of his ABCs and learns to read, but learns that he hates school by the time he's 2, you've lost. So be flexible in the micro from the hour to hour, day to day. Be flexible in the macro. It may be a season. You may have a bad month. You may have a bad year. When your mother-in-law is sick and you agree to take care of her and your husband loses his job and you have to move across the country, you didn't plan any of that stuff, and it really throws a curveball at your homeschooled plan. But you know what? It'll all turn out. You got a long time to make this thing work out.
Yeah, and the more, I guess, I'm getting now the gift, really, of perspective and able to look back
Yeah.
over many, many years of homeschooling 7 children. And the things that my kids talk about, they are never the curriculum. Like they never sit around the Thanksgiving table and go, remember that time that, mom opened up to page 47 in our history textbook? They never do that. But what they're still talking about are the stories that we read.
Yep.
And the things that we did that were sort of impromptu. I was reading a story called Men of the Mississippi. You guys are familiar with Hauling, Sea Hauling and
Sure.
Seabird and all those, just great books. And there's a story of Min, this little snapping turtle, and he gets stuck in a turbine in a dam. Well, I'm trying to explain how this little turtle could get sucked into a dam and what the lock and dam system was. And my kids were just, a couple of them for sure were just eyes glazed over like, we don't get it. So then I looked up on YouTube. This is what a lock and dam system does. And this is how a little turtle could have gotten sucked in. And they were still like, and all of a sudden I thought, you know
We're
what?
going to go to Bonneville.
Yeah. I'm like,
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah. We lived, 45 minutes away from one of those amazing lock and dam systems, Bonneville Dam. You've been there with me on the Columbia River.
Yeah, sure.
And so I'm like, kids, put your shoes on. We're going to get in the car. And we had that opportunity because we were flexible, because and also we went there, and the rangers, of course, loved it because there was nobody there in the middle of the week. And they gave us an absolutely amazing tour of the fish hatchery and the salmon counting stations. And I said, we're reading about this little turtle. And the park ranger was like, oh, let me show you. All kinds of things get sucked into turbines. And this is where the animals go. This is how we let them out. And all of a sudden it came alive to them. That's the stuff that they remember.
Yeah.
And I think it goes a whole lot farther than just sitting there with a workbook all day long.
Oh, for sure. And when you're an old woman 60 years from now, and you're on your
60
deathbed.
years from now.
Well, you're only 29 right now, right?
This is why we're friends. Lie to me, Steve.
When you're on your deathbed, your kids are not going to be saying, "Oh, Mom, I'll never forget the way you taught us to diagram sentences, and I'll always treasure the way you showed me how to do quadratic equations." They're going to say, "Mama, I will never forget that trip to Bonneville Dam, and we
That's
went,
right.
we talked to the ranger, and it was so amazing." And I don't think that turned out to be true in your case, but you might have turned one of your children into a career direction of becoming a park ranger or becoming a fish and wildlife
Sounds like
conservation
something
agent
Summer
or
might
something.
do. Yeah.
Yes, Summer could well become all of that, and she'd be great at anything she chose to do, sure.
Yeah. It's
So
really true.
flexibility, hour to hour, day to day, season to season, you reach the goal, but somebody said, if you do it the hard way, it's like pushing a rope uphill.
Yeah.
Or pushing a chain uphill. You can do it, but it's just exhausting for you, and it's exhausting for the children. And at the end of the day, nobody's had a good time, and nobody's going to have any good memories.
Boy, so true.
Take the opportunity to if you're teaching them to learn, then they will spend a lifetime continuing to learn after you set down the carrot and the whip that you were using with that other curriculum.
Boy, and the carrot and the whip it's no joke. And there are a lot of homeschool moms that are listening to this right now that they've just now cracked open the books, right?
God
They've
bless
just
them.
they've just got a schedule. They're just starting. And within a week or two, they're going to start to feel that like this is drudgery. What do you say to the homeschooler who, after only like a month or 6 weeks of homeschooling, starts feeling like they're a slave to the curriculum that they're using?
Set yourself free, girl. You cannot be a slave to the curriculum. The curriculum has to serve you and your children, not the other way around. Curriculum can never be the master. And the thing that you mustn't forget is that God created children to be learners. I read somewhere that the average 2-year-old asks something like 247 questions a day.
Savannah will appreciate that.
And she's going to have 5 of them. So that's over 1,100 questions a day for you, Savannah. But that process of children having the God-given gift of curiosity was his idea. This is how you're going to teach your children, because they're born wanting to understand the world around them. But 3 weeks into a box curriculum, and so often children's body language changes, their arms are folded, they're staring at the ceiling, they're bored, they're crying, there's tears. Because I thought learning was going to be fun, Mama. You said we were going to learn.
Right.
But this is not fun. This is not at all what I had in mind, Mama.
Yeah, it's so true. And so I think your next point, probably this transitions so well into it. Of course, you guys publish, and Jane has written 5 in a row, which is heavily, heavily reliant on reading and reading aloud to your kids. It's something that you guys have treasured, and our family has too. Why did you include this in your list of 4 things to help homeschoolers get off on a good start?
Well, because reading aloud to your children builds builds knowledge bridges that you can relate to for the rest of your life. And you just said it, remember the time that we read about the turtle that got caught in the turbine?
Yep.
And that's something that you'll talk about, and that led to the trip to the Bonneville Dam. But it also builds emotional bridges because books, literature, allows our children to experience emotions in a small measure. When the character in the story's grandfather passes away or becomes ill, it gives us a chance to talk about the cycle of life a little bit and let children begin to process some of those emotions before they have to do it. They can rehearse some of those emotions before they have to do it in real life. So you build emotional bridges with your children, you build informational bridges with your children. And frankly, football starts, this week. Is our first, full week of football, and I love football.
I know. I'm like, football? Is that the bat? Is that the bat?
Yeah,
Steve,
that's the bat. That's the bat.
That checkered ball? I'm just kidding.
Yeah, that's it, Heidi. But you totally threw me off my game here. You just made me forget what I was talking about. What was I talking about?
We were talking about
emotional bridges, relational bridges. Here you go. So football starting this week, and each coach is given 3 timeouts during the course of each half of the game. So when everything's gone wrong and he doesn't know what else to do, he can call timeout. I need to regroup. I need to think about this. And reading is every homeschool mom's timeout. When the day's not going the way you planned, the kids are in tears, the daughter ran off to her room and slammed the door, the son is, climbing up the wall, you can say, time out. Come on, everybody gather around on the sofa. We're going to read a story together. And you began reading, and it doesn't matter what. I mean, it does, but, there's thousands of wonderful children's books. There's also some real stinkers out there, and that's another story. But read them. All the Little House on the Prairie books, or the Hobbit stories, or the Chronicles of Narnia, and when you gather together, it dials everybody's temperature down.
Yes.
It builds that relationship. I read somewhere that children do better emotionally and academically if they're read to in utero. And that kind of made my head explode for a minute. But the sound of a mother's voice is the most wonderful sound to an unborn child. And the rhythm of the written English language is quite different from the way you and I talk. And so hearing the English language read in mama's voice, they have no cognitive understanding, certainly not even as an infant or maybe even as an early toddler. They don't really understand the context, but they know this. I love mama. I love when we snuggle. I love when she reads books. Books make me feel good. So that's your coach's timeout. When the day unravels and it's all out of your control, read. And read aloud to your kids every day from the time they're newborns until the day they move out and go away. Gather all your kids around you, high school kids, and you don't even have to necessarily say it. If some of your kids have grown up with you reading aloud and you gather the youngers around, 99% of the time the older ones will come around and snuggle up, and they want to lean in and listen to the story that mom's going to read over lunch. And Jane and I have been married now. We've been together 58 years. We dated through high school. We've been married 53 years. And we read aloud to one another every single day because it builds informational bridges and it builds emotional bridges. And so we have 100,000 pages of stories that we've shared together that we can reminisce and talk about. Or if she quotes a line or talks about a character from a book that we read together, I immediately know we're on the same page. We have a laugh together or a tear remembering that story that we shared so many years ago. So read aloud to your kids.
Stories are powerful. There's a reason that Jesus used parables to teach when he was walking on the earth, and the story builds an emotional connection. And this is, I think, especially important. It's why I love history curricula that teaches through the lives of the people that were actually the players in those stories. So early
Yeah.
American history, you read the stories of Thomas Jefferson, the stories of Benjamin Franklin. All of a sudden, these people, the stories bring them to life. And now, instead of what we were talking about earlier, which is, you go to school and you study for a test and they tell you, okay, today we're going to, it's 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. You're going to forget that stuff.
Yep.
But if your kids can attach those instances in time to a story, they're going to remember it forever.
Forever. And how much, a friend once said, well, a mutual friend, you know Diana. In fact, I think you introduced me to Diana Waring
Yes.
many years ago. And Diana used to say, if I invite you over for a cup of coffee to my house, you have certain expectations. But if I get there and she hands me a teaspoon of Sanka crystals and I'm crunching it and chewing it, that's kind of sharing coffee, but it's not all that great. And so, to read an editor's summary story of Washington crossing the Delaware is one thing. But when you read, his own words, and he said it was Christmas night and we were so cold, but we could see the reflection of the British campfires on the branches of the trees just on the other side of the river. And we broke through the ice, and I told the men, hush, not a word from any of you. We're going to surprise the British. And slowly we paddled across, and the ice floe moved. When you've read that, that's a cup of coffee. Yeah. That is not an editor's freeze-dried crystals of the story.
Boy, so good. And there are so many great books out there. Do you have some favorites that come to mind, Steve, when you think about, read alouds that you just love that you'd read over and over again?
Oh, I had daughters, and one of my favorites was the whole series called Grandma's Attic.
Yeah,
and I think they're still around. I love those. I love The Little House on the Prairie. We went through those several times. All the Chronicles of Narnia. There's a series of books called Swallows and Amazons, and I will brace your listeners. It's a British series written in the early 20th century, and there's about 4 children and their adventures. You realize, by the way, that is the formula for great children's literature is children without adults that are having to solve life problems on their own because dad's in the service or mom is in the hospital or whatever.
This is the Chronicles of Narnia.
Yeah, it is the Chronicles of Narnia. Any great children's book is children trying to solve adult problems without any adults around to help them. The Boxcar Children, I love all of those.
Yeah.
But Swallows and Amazons, one of the little girls in British fashion of the early, as my kids would say, Dad, you realize you were born in the last century? That is so last century, Dad. In the earliest 20th century, not 21st century. So I'm warning your listeners. One of the little girls' names is Titty. And so you can do with that what you want. We just read it, and the kids chortled the first time, and after that, they forgot all about it, and it was just Titty was one of our favorite characters. But I talked to a homeschool mom the other day, and I said, how did you handle that? She said, I just changed it every time I came to it. So Titty was Margaret or whatever, so you can dive in or you can change it. But Honey for a Child's Heart's a wonderful book by Gladys Hunt, and it's full of wonderful ideas. The traditional books, I don't know if I finished saying that thing, that series of books, that British series, is called Swallows and Amazons, and it's a wonderful series of adventures for children. But Gladys Hunt has written a great resource, and historically, you could look to Caldecott winners and say, if it's a Caldecott winner, it's going to be a great book. That has not necessarily been true the last 25 years, because
Absolutely
often
true.
That's a political choice because it breaks rules and boundaries of culture, and sometimes they're the last thing you might want to read to your child. So just because you see a Caldecott Award or some kind of a gold sticker on a book's cover doesn't necessarily mean that it's great for your kids.
Well, and I think once you realize that this is, this has been true for me. Once you get hooked up with a really good series, a lot of times that will bleed over into another one, because people will find out, oh, you're reading, Swallows and Amazons, and they'll say, oh, you got to check out the Penderbacks, right? So really great series of books written from the same perspective, right? I love what you said. I never even thought of that, Steve, but you're right. It's children who are without their parents for whatever reason, and they have to go and figure it out. And Disney used to do this really well, but now, of course, Disney's woke, and it's just not the same as it used to be. But man, these old books, I'll tell you, as my kids have gotten older, that's the stuff they remember. I mean, truly,
Yeah.
the things that they loved. When Savannah graduated from our homeschool, she gave me a present for her high school graduation, and it was a picture written by or created by Don Richardson, who wrote a book called Peace Child, right? And so
Right,
you know
yeah.
my love of
Great
missionary
book.
stories. That's a
Yeah.
great story. And he wrote he painted a picture called Mealtime Beckons to Home. And it's just these huts that have dotted the coast of Papua New Guinea. And the little children knew that it was time to come home whenever they would see smoke rising from their mother's huts. They knew she was making dinner, so it was time to come home. And when she gave that to me, she said that her favorite memories, the things that beckoned her and always do beckon her home, are a story. That we knew it was time for a story. We would sit around and we would read a story. And we just moved into a new house, as you know. And I have had a lot of fun setting up a library for my grandchildren. So I got, Jane would be so proud of me. I got little easels for some of my favorite books so I could put them out there like Andrew Henry's Meadow. I put it out there for the kids. Oh my goodness. And to watch their eyes light up because they know Mamsie's going to read them a story. It's just, you cannot underestimate the power of reading out loud to kids.
I had a woman contact us one time. The curriculum that Jane wrote that we have been sharing for the last 30 years is called 5 in a Row. And the principle, in short, is that you read the same story. These are short illustrated children's books for younger kids, and then chapter books for older kids. But you read the same section for 5 days in a row, and each day we focus on something different, the history behind that, where the stories took place, or the language, or the illustrator's style and technique, and so forth and so on. But one woman wrote, and she said, I just couldn't believe this. This was so stupid that you would expect a child, a 5 or 6, 7-year-old child, to sit through the same book 5 times. She said, I decided to count this week how many times I found my son reading the book when we weren't in class. And I wrote down all the places, and she sent it in a letter, and there was like 27 places. I caught him sitting on the washing machine. I caught him under the bed, in his tree house, in the dog house, in his sister's top bunk. And she listed 27 places she had caught him reading the book because he had fallen in love with the story. And in the process, they began to rehearse the story and the emotions that go with the story. And so that legacy will stand long after some of the textbook lessons have faded away into the dust.
Boy, it's so true. In my mind, I'm thinking, I haven't sent this to you guys, but I'm doing something special for my grandkids at our house. So I found these little decals, and you put the decal on the baseboard, and it makes the baseboard look like it has a hole in it, and there's a mouse in there. And there's a picture of this little mouse inside of his little hole inside the wall, and he's reading a book called Of Mice and Men. And then there's another one that I put in the bathroom downstairs, and it's a little mouse on a toilet inside of his little mouse hole, and he's reading, the collection of Calvin and Hobbes. And I just thought so cute to sort of put all these little decals around my house in different places where the kids can find them, and they'll always see a mouse in his house reading a book. I just think, and especially in this age of video games and it's just, it's so good. It's just, I love it. I mean, I could talk, The Borrowers comes to mind. You and I could probably talk about.
Oh, yeah, The Borrowers, yeah.
Oh,
wonderful
for goodness
story.
sake.
So what
good.
you're doing, I mean, in listening to you share that, I mean, what you're doing is dropping little breadcrumbs for your children to follow that leads them to the books. You put it out on a little easel stand so that they can find it and go, wow, I don't know this book. What's this about? And then they see the little mouse and they're reading a book, and you invite them to read when they come to Mamsie's house for a tea party or whatever. Those are the things that cause a child to become a lifetime learner, to fall in love with learning, to fall in love with books, and to fall in love with Jesus when you're reading the Bible.
Boy,
that's the stuff that makes homeschooling a joy, a delight, rather than a heavy weight and a drudge. And if you teach your kids, if you focus on learning instead of on the big capital E education,
yep,
you can do this thing, and you can do it in delightful little steps. And don't misunderstand. I mean, not every day is going to be, rainbows and puppy dogs, but, math may be a challenge some days, but
no,
spelling maybe.
Say it isn't so.
But
say it's not so.
The crazy part is, and I've said this so often in workshops, we tend to think that God invited us, and I think it is an invitation, that he invited us to homeschool our kids because they'd get a better education. That has almost nothing to do with it. Now, coincidentally, they will. But he invited us to homeschool our kids so that we could learn to become an authentic family, so that we could learn together, so that some of the stuff that I, as an adult, have never dealt with in my life, I've always been impatient, or I've always lost my temper. And so if you didn't deal with that as a young woman, then the Lord gives you a husband, and he'll remind you that you haven't dealt with that. And if you don't deal with it, then he'll give you children. And then if you still don't deal with it, he'll invite you to homeschool. And now you have a whole tribe of little living witnesses every day going, Mama, why do you always wait till the last minute to do things? Mom, why do you always get so angry when you can't find your keys? Mom, why do you? And you say, you know what, kids, we're all on a learning journey together. We're becoming a family. I'm learning to love your father more. I'm learning to love you more. We're learning to forgive one another. This is a journey that the Lord invited us to go on, and it's about a whole lot more than who the signers of the Constitution were, although that's important.
So good. Last thing on your list, another one really important that my friend Ginny will totally appreciate. You said, get outside. Get outside as much as you can. Why is this on your list? I mean, you're up in Michigan. You can't get outside a whole lot in the wintertime there. What you going to do?
Well,
you're going to come back? You're going to come back to Kansas City. That's what you're going to do.
I'm going to come back to Kansas City for the winter. I'm nobody's fool, but yeah, get outside. I said earlier that God's natural gift to you as a parent was the curiosity that children are born with. And if we don't squash that with a heavy box curriculum, if we allow them to continue to be lifetime learners and to ask questions. And by the way, the best day that you'll ever have in a homeschool is the day your kid says, Mama, how come? And it doesn't matter what the question is. And sometimes you'll have to lie. But rather than just saying it's, 286,000 miles per second is the speed of light, you just go, I don't know, honey. That is an incredibly great question. Where would we go to find out?
That's a great question.
Together, you go on a learning journey. Now, probably 9 times out of 10, because of the way we were taught in school, you won't know the answer to the question, and you're not lying, and you really don't know. But that process of curiosity is complemented by the gift of wonder. And children are born with an awe and a wonder that's just magical. I mean, I'm 74 and a half years old, and I will never, ever forget, because I know where I was. We moved when I was 3, so I was somewhere between 2 and 3, and we'd been somewhere on a winter's evening in Kansas City, and it was one of those record-breaking snowfalls, probably a 10-incher or something, and my parents went up the back steps to go in the back door of our upstairs apartment, and my dad was carrying me on his hip or on his shoulder, and they stopped. And it was that magic moment when the snow is so wet and so heavy that it's absolutely silent outside. You can't hear
I love it.
anything.
Oh, I love it.
And I stood there, and to this day, 72 years later, I still remember in awe and wonder how magical that moment was to stand there. So God's creation beckons us, and it's outside. You're not going to find it in the new all-season room or in the new, basement home theater room. You're going to find it along a creek bank, or you're going to find it in a pasture of wildflowers, or you're going to find it at the zoo or at the park. When we began homeschooling in 1981, you really couldn't be outside during school hours. But Jane, we lived very close to a beautiful cemetery that had ponds and lakes and beautiful trees, and none of the people who resided there ever told tales or complained.
Made a noise.
They were just absolutely quiet. And so Jane would take our kids there, and they would sit by the creek, or they would sit by the little pond there and do some of their schoolwork. And, they each, I remember that one of the exercises that they developed was they each chose a tree. One of them chose a huge, beautiful old sycamore tree, and the other one, I think, a big old oak tree. And those became their trees. And so if there was a poetry assignment, they were to write a poem about their tree. Or if there was a drawing assignment, they were to draw their tree. And they drew it in all 4 seasons of the year, the bare, beautiful branches and the inner structure, and then the colorful fall leaves, and then the summer foliage. And they wrote short stories about their trees and the imaginary lives that their trees led. And so when Jane and I built our first house, our kids were well into their 20s, maybe even 30s. And so for a housewarming gift, they each went and got leaves from their tree at that cemetery from 30 years, 20 years earlier, and pressed them into concrete and made concrete stepping stones for our garden from their tree.
Wow.
And I'll tell you one other fun story when we were talking earlier about reading. On the day our kids were 5 years apart, on the day that the oldest was to get married, the following day, she was still living at home. Tomorrow is her wedding day. Her sister's her maid of honor. And they could have spent that last night at some wild party out, doing a whatever it is women do, a bachelorette party or watching anything. I don't know. Who knows?
We would be watching Pride and Prejudice. That's what we would be doing.
Looking for Mr. Darcy.
That's right.
I saw it. You've probably seen it too on Facebook, a T-shirt that says, "Run like Mr. Collins asked you to marry him." Which, that cracked me up. But having daughters and a wife, I've seen and read all of Jane Austen. In fact, we visited Jane Austen's home. But anyway, so their last night there, and I look up, and we had a long sofa, and so they each were sitting with their back against one arm of the sofa on each end, and then their knees up and their feet down, kind of meeting here in the middle. So they made kind of a W with their bodies, and they'd each picked a stack of their favorite books. And Carrie would read a few paragraphs from one of her favorites that they had read together, and then Becky would read some paragraphs from her favorite, and then Carrie would read, and then Becky would read. And they spent that last evening together sharing and remembering some of the favorite books that we'd read together as a family over all those years of homeschooling that had gone in the past. Well, that's the goal. That's what you want this to be. You want your kids to have wonderful memories as well as being well-educated and having emotional maturity. Yeah. And being ready to go out and meet and find their place in the world, rather than just simply filling buckets and checking off to-do lists, and all of you having a terrible time on the process.
Yeah, it's true, and that's not to say that you're not still going to have a terrible day from time to time. But I'll tell you, I mean, while you're sitting here talking about this, I'm getting more and more excited to spend a little bit of time with my 13-year-old, the one that I've got left in, reading to her and making ourselves a pot of tea. They really are my favorite memories from, 25 years of homeschooling. And I think I needed the little shot in the arm, just the encouragement, because that is my regret. I think that at least for the first probably 7 or 8 years of homeschooling, I feel like I took myself so seriously, like I'm going to get the checklist done and all the things. And I just wished I would have spent more time focusing on the relationships with my kids, because it really, really does go by fast.
Yeah, super fast. I used to read a little poem sometimes at a workshop for beginning homeschoolers. And during a break a minute ago, I looked it up so that I could have it handy. I don't know who wrote this. But it says, "If I had my child to raise all over again, I'd build self-esteem first and that new house later. I'd finger paint more and point my finger less. I'd do less correcting and more connecting. I'd take my eyes off my watch and I'd watch with my eyes. I'd care to know less and I would know to care more. I'd take more hikes and I'd fly more kites. And I'd stop playing serious and I would seriously play. I'd run through more fields and I'd gaze at more stars. I'd do more hugging and less tugging, and I'd see the oak tree and the acorn more often. I would be firm less often and affirm much more. I'd model less about the love of power and more about the power of love." I love that poem.
I love it. Beautiful. It's beautiful. It's a great way to just, I think, step back and talk about what's really important. Long after you've closed the last page on that math book and you're done diagramming sentences and you're done with all of those things, and you're not teaching long division anymore, by the grace of God, you're going to have a relationship with your children that will go on well into the later years of your life. And as you're a great-grandfather now, and I'm a grandmother. What in the world? I don't even know what happened. We just blinked, and all of a sudden we're like, there are people everywhere that our children have made.
Yeah, exactly.
And it really does. Exactly. It really does go by fast. Really quickly, I want to get your comments on something I'm seeing in the news. And I sent this to you a couple days ago because I thought, man, I really want to hear what you have to say. I think the other side of this is the helicopter parents, right? The parents that are so nervous and so worried that they're not going to get it right, that they feel the need to control every aspect of their kids' lives all the way up through college. And I saw this article in the news, and it says rising parental anxiety is resulting in, quote, next level helicopter parents. For college students, a psychotherapist told Fox News Digital, and others agree that as well-intentioned as it may be, it can create harm in the long run. I think we see a lot of anxiety in parenting today, and more parents, I think, trying to attempt to connect with their kids. I mean, I heard this from a friend of mine who teaches at a local college here, that parents are like calling professors and talking to them about the grades their kids are making. It's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. How do we keep, Steve, how do we engage our kids, love on them, pour ourselves into them, and not become helicopter parents?
Yeah, great questions, Heidi. That's one of the questions that our culture is facing now is the perpetual youth, children living at home with their parents till they're 28, 29, 30 years old, not settling on a career. Mom and dad are helicoptering over every detail of their lives. And the time to break that habit is now. When your kids are 5, 6, 7, you got to give them the grace and the freedom to make some mistakes when the price is low. Yeah,
that's right.
Making good choices about boy-girl relationships, the cost of making a bad decision when you're 7 is much different than the cost of making a bad decision when you're 17.
Come on. I know. Like, people tell me it's so much work parenting these 7-year-old. I'm like, dude, do the work, because it's much easier than trying to parent a 17-year-old.
Yeah, for sure. I'd laugh when people say, well, I finally made it through the toddler years and now I can get some sleep. My life's going to be easy. I'm like, oh, you have no idea. Wait till they start dating. Wait till they get married. Wait till your son-in-law loses his job.
Turns out they're always your kids.
You're always your kid. That's right.
Yeah.
So, no, I think that, that's a carryover from that anxiety that we have to do it all for our kids. And it's probably a higher risk for homeschool parents than it is for public school parents, because we have this, it is. It's a sobering weight to carry, to think, if I don't get this right, my kids are going to never get into college. They're going to be unemployable. They're going to bring their children home and live in my basement forever. I've got to get this one right, But if you do it right, you'll get it right. And if you do it wrong, you'll get it wrong. And so doing it right is helping them become learners rather than educated. I think it was Mark Twain or somebody who said, I never let my education get in the way of learning.
Wow,
and,
good.
And then, those stages of parenting, you start off like this, you're setting boundaries and protecting your children. And then you begin, at some point to turn it over. And then you begin to give them a little freedom. And then at some point, you got to let them fly. And if you've done the hard work when they were young, you can enjoy the results when they're old. And I remember a conversation you and I had once upon a time about, you were panicking about a decision that one of your adult kids had made. And I said, Heidi, you've done a great job. You and Jay have done a wonderful job parenting them. It's time to trust them to make the right decision. And darned if they didn't.
Yep.
I remember that conversation, and that's been 15 years ago or something.
I'd say 15 years, yeah. It's crazy. Yeah, it's true. And you were right. And I remember just going home and talking to Jay about it and just saying, I'm going to have to take my hands off the steering wheel here and just let my child listen to the voice of the Lord for themselves. And as it turns out, that was the right thing to do. And I think that kind of, maybe, Steve, that is the key to not becoming a helicopter parent, is just, really it's doing the hard work on the front end so that you train your child to hear the voice of the Lord above all the other voices they're going to call out to them. And that's when you rest. I never worry. I mean, one of the things I love about being a grandmother this season of my life is I'm watching Savannah and Ryan, and now Sierra and Jake, parenting, and I never worry that my grandkids are being loved on, that they're being trained in righteousness, that they're going to have a good head on their shoulders, because I know my kids have a good head on their shoulders. Yep. And they're doing the hard work. And that really is the blessing, right? That Paul said, I got no greater joy than to know, my kids are walking in the truth. And that's how you get there. Yeah, exactly right, Heidi. And you and Jay have done an exemplary job. And when you said, do I have any regrets? I wish that we had met you sooner and knew you better, because I would have
modeled more of our life after what you and Jay have done, because we look up to you guys, and you guys have done a phenomenal job. And I say that as somebody who's watched you now for 17 years raising your kids. And so congratulations on a job well done. But yeah, that's the key. Do the hard work on the front end. And we had friends who lived a much more fun life. Mom and dad both worked. They had lots of money. They traveled more. They had the boat, the lake house, and all of that when their kids were young, and their kids went to public school, and then they went off to summer camp for 3 weeks. And we were homeschooling, and we didn't have any money, and we were a single income family. But now we love watching our kids, our grandkids, soon to be our great grandkids, and many of those parents who took the fun, easy route in their 20s and early 30s are now suffering through their son's third divorce, and their daughter's in drug rehab for the 4th time, and their grandchild's in jail, and they're trying to raise bail money. And it's, there's no hard correlation. Let me add, when Jane came to me 42 years ago and asked me about homeschooling, as I prayed about it, I felt like the Lord said, you're accountable for how your kids are raised.
Wow, it's good.
And I thought, well, if I'm accountable, then we ought to be involved in the process, because I don't want to be accountable for something somebody else did.
Right.
But it was like 3 years later that he told me part 2 of that sentence. He said, but your kids are accountable for how they turn out. You're not accountable for how. We all know great families that produce rotten kids, and we know rotten families that have produced great kids. But if you do your part, odds are very good that your kids will turn out to be kids that you can love and enjoy their company all the days of your life, and they'll be there in your old age, and you can watch your grandkids and your great-grandkids. So be flexible, read aloud to your kids, get them outside, do the hard work on the front end of this deal, model the behavior you want your kids to exhibit. Let them catch you reading, let them catch you praying, let them catch you reading your Bible, let them catch you confessing your sins one to another. This is going to be great. You're on an amazing life adventure, and you'll look back at the end of your days and you'll say the same thing that Jane and I say, and the same things that you and Jay say, and that is, we didn't know what we were doing a lot of the time, but the Lord was faithful.
Boy, good.
And he met us right where we needed him.
So good. So true. Steve Lambert, you are a national treasure. I so appreciate you coming on the show with me. If people are interested in finding out about the curriculum that you guys have published, 5 in a row, where would they go?
It's all spelled out like one long word. 5 in a row, FIVEINAROW.com, 5inarrow.com. This is our 30th year in the marketplace, and we've won pretty much every award, Editor's Award, Publisher's Award, Parents Award that you can win, because parents find it affordable, easy, rewarding, and effective.
Yeah, and the books are to die for. I mean, the books that Jane picked are just wonderful classics, really just wonderful. Jane has introduced me to some of my favorite books. Like I was just telling you when we took a break a minute ago, while you were talking, I'm Googling the Swallows and Amazon series, and I already ordered it, man. I can't wait. I'm going to get that in the mail. And
like one of my favorite stories in that series is they fall asleep on their father's ship in England, and he goes into town for something, and the mooring breaks loose in the night in the fog, and they wake up and they're out in the middle of the English Channel in the fog.
That's how we feel in America right now. Like somebody fell asleep at the wheel.
And we got untied and we're adrift and in the fog, and we don't know. So
That's right. That's right. You know me, I can always tie it back to politics somehow. My friend, thank you for coming on the show today. It's just been a delight to have you. Let's talk again soon.
It's always fun. Thank you, Heidi.
For more information on my guest today, you can hop on over to the show notes. We'd love to hear from you, and I will link back to 5 in a row, or you can just go to 5inarrow.com and check it out. I think you guys will be encouraged. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that this has been as encouraging for you as it has been for me, just to listen to Steve talk about the things that actually really matter at the end of the day. And I hope you guys will take this to heart and love your people well. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I will see you right back here again at the intersection of faith and